Okay, welcome to the Relo Network Asia webinar series. For those of you who are unaware, in conjunction with our sister company, Relo Japan, we're conducting these webinars on a monthly basis to get some insights from various topics related to global mobility in Asia. So my name is Steve Burson, CEO of Relo Network Asia. And I thank you very much for joining us today, wherever you may be joining from. Initially, I'd like to start off with just a couple of important sort of housekeeping items. One, this presentation today or panel discussion is being recorded. So for all the people who are registered, in the next day or so, you will receive a link to the recording so that you can share that out to anybody who might be interested. Our discussion today will be about 30 to 35 minutes long, after which we will entertain some question and answers, some Q&A for 10 or 15 minutes then, and we'll try to answer as many of the questions that you send in to us. The questions you can put in the Q&A, which should be in the bottom of your screen. Q&A chat there if you would like to ask us any questions. I would now like to get straight into the content of today's panel discussion, which is all things that are related to sustainability. And from the perspective of a service provider here at Relo Network Asia, it's been a little bit difficult for me and the people within our organisation to understand what sustainability means for a small company like us out here in Asia, and sort of where should we be spending our time and those sorts of things. So I'm starting to get a better idea of that now, but in wanting to continue to learn and find out more about how we can do more in this space, I've invited three very experienced members of our industry to join us today. Not only are they experienced in their roles within global mobility themselves, but they also have quite significant roles in sustainability issues within their own organisations or within the industry here. So hopefully they'll give us some good insights today on how we can entertain this important topic in Asia. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Emma. And Emma, maybe if you can introduce yourself before you perhaps answer this first question I have for you. What has your company been doing in the sustainability space in the last 6 months or so, and how has that sort of resonated with other BGRS staff and BGRS partners that you're working with here in Asia? We're really interested to know after you perhaps give us a short introduction. So over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Steve. My name's Emma Douglas-Rose. I'm a senior manager on the Mobility Experience Solution team, which is the consulting arm at BGRS. I grew up in Hong Kong, lived in Indonesia, China, and come from a cultural training background with a specialism in Southeast Asia. And in the last few years with BGRS, I've been really at the forefront of our ESG efforts, both in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in environmental sustainability, of course, with a focus on the mobility field. So with that in mind, our company has really been focusing heavily on this, particularly in the past year. So certainly really got some headway in the last 6 months. We have our own carbon net neutral goal for 2030. And that for us is a global initiative. We've gone about this over the last couple of years, excuse me, with internal surveys. We've asked people what they're interested in, and we have seen some discrepancies in interest areas regionally. But we have seen that there is significant interest in sustainability, at least in a global sense. And what we've done is we brought together diverse representative people from different regions and different functions in our business as a core work group to focus on sustainability. So what we've all really aligned on is that our position as an RMC, if you'd like to call it that, a talent mobility company, is that there is a strong responsibility as in the position between suppliers, of which we have 2,500 globally, and clients with whom we assist on 60,000 annual moves, to sort of lead the charge in this area. So anticipating needs for clients who maybe aren't as far along, being more proactive and coming up with innovative solutions and recommendations for clients and for suppliers alike. So as a part of that, we've released a 6-phase roadmap in one of our recent publications for sustainable mobility. We also have some 5 steps to a DEI approach in mobility coming out next week. And what we've done particularly is get people together into collaborative forums, find out what they need from us. And what we're hearing is quite a lot. Most companies, some companies are a little further ahead than others, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, but many companies really do feel that need for support. And the way that we've gone about it is a 3-pronged approach, considering both suppliers, ourselves, and our clients. So that's our own EcoVadis, our own ISO qualifications, but training, supporting our supply chain, not just giving them a mandate to improve things, but saying, okay, where are you at? How can we assist? What can we do to work together? Because every different supplier is going to have different needs and a different niche where they can make a difference. And then with clients on the other side, once you've thought about it, once you haven't, how can we enable? How can we support? How can we change mindsets? So it's an epic initiative, as you can imagine, but it's something that we are talking about on a weekly basis with mostly all of our clients because it is such a hot topic.
Sounds great. Okay. Perhaps over to you, Benny. Same question. At another well-known RMC in Asia. What has your company been doing in this space? And how are you seeing things resonate with your staff and partners and clients?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. My name is Benny Tan. I'm the leader for the Asia Pacific region for AllTech Global Relocations, headquarters back in Texas, US. Now, what we have been doing over the last 6 months, I'll probably break it down, or rather simply put, under the ESG umbrella, as probably all of you are getting familiar with the term environmental, and then we have social and the governance, especially when it comes to the environmental part of it. As what Steve mentioned as well during our discussion, it has been very different across the 3 regions, right? I mean, you have the Europeans taking really way ahead, and then the US, close behind, and APAC is a little bit behind the scale in terms of awareness, in terms of actions and stuff like that. So one of the key things that we are doing as a company, we are committed to contributing towards a sustainable future, and of course adhering to our ESG goals. And under the environment sector, we are engaging benchmarking and rating organizations in the space of environmental and sustainability, so that we can track and measure where we are and where are we going and how we can get further than that. Because one of the key things is that before we start propagate downwards to our supplier partners, we need to lead that by example and walk the talk. So really looking into many areas. In fact, without using the word sustainability, we started all this back in 2013 when it was more like a go green, right? That whole green motion, if you will, right? So looking things like how do we reduce carbon footprint, even as simple as IT, right? Gone are the days where companies ran rooms of server racks and stuff like that, starting going into cloud computing and for DSP wise, I'm sure Steve, one of the things that you guys did very well, moving away from that whole DSP welcome package into more digitalized and stuff like that. And all these things in the past, we probably see them as recycle, reuse, reduce, that kind of effort. But now all these are coming under the umbrella of sustainability, because in a way you can see that there are people who may not necessarily see the connection, but they are actually pretty similar. So one of the key things that we're doing, especially for the APAC region, is awareness of how this is actually connected, because a lot of people will say, oh, sustainability is for the big companies. It doesn't really relate to us or doesn't really connect to us. But however, I think the recent climate, especially with whatever is happening around the world, with the whole global warming thing, a lot more clients, especially European clients, taking the lead of putting in ESG, especially environmental sustainability, as part of their requirements to be their business partners. So in a way that not only directly impact us as the relocation company, it will over time, to Emma's point, flow down to our supplier partners, and everyone needs to come on board. But to Emma's point as well, everybody is coming on board at different phases, right? I mean, if you're going to ask us to match up what the Europeans has done, the last I read, the EU has just passed this whole a draft, that hasn't really been passed yet. That's really focusing around what are the kind of commitments the companies are doing around that, and they are actually putting it mandatory downwards to the supply chain as well. So in a larger of stuff is like, this is something that, if I may put it, like it or not, it is coming, right? It's better to be prepared than not to. So one of the key things that we are doing, at least on the more smaller scale internally, awareness of the reducing hardware recycling. Paperless sounds like a low-lying fruit, and so on and so forth. So this is some of the things that we are doing a lot more aggressively. In fact, we just formed one of our, we call it TMRG, it's a team members resource group that focus just around sustainability and to look into how we could do that as a company, hearing the voices from our team members.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and one of the things that I have, kind of, well, sort of wondered, I guess, is, things in Asia are, probably a lot less developed than perhaps our colleagues in Europe and the US, and that puts sort of Asia in a very sort of different position, I guess, and a lot of the conversations that are perhaps happening in Europe and America may not quite fit with where we are here in Asia. So with that in mind, Sean, and you've done quite a bit in this space, way in front of me in a lot of these areas. What do you think are the challenges here in Asia when you compare this movement, I guess, to what's happening in Europe and the US? Where do you think Asia sits?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And just a quick intro, I'm Sean Collins. I'm the managing partner at Talent Mobility Search. So we're a specialist recruiter and advisory in the mobility and international HR space. So I've been very passionate about sustainability for many years. I studied it, well, I did a virtual course with a university in Sweden on sustainability, and I've seen this come in for quite a while. COVID kind of pushed the sustainability agenda back a little bit, but a lot of people knew that this was always going to be coming down the pipe very soon, and I think that's what everyone's seeing right now. We've set up a sustainability group on LinkedIn called Sustainability and ESG and Global Mobility. So I encourage everyone to join that because it's a good forum for sharing ideas and best practices. So in terms of Asia, I mean, Steve, you mentioned it. Asia is a little bit behind in terms of education and awareness, and also in terms of the kind of drivers for encouraging companies to have a very strong sustainability or ESG agenda. In the West, it's hitting bottom lines because you're restricted in funding if you don't have a very strong ESG proposition or report. And also in talent, if you think that a third of the employee population will be Generation Z by 2030, these are the employees that want to work for a company that they feel impassioned about their impact on the world. And if a company hasn't got that strong ESG kind of credential behind it, they're going to struggle to hire the best talent. So that will catch up in Asia, and companies will realize that if they want to hire the best talent, if they want access to to funding, then they are going to have to start addressing that. But yeah, it is a little bit behind, but it will certainly catch up. And multinationals from the US and Europe, obviously they have a global approach in terms of their sustainability kind of programs and their commitments. So that will flow through into Asia. So we will see it happening. It's just trailing a little bit.
Sure. Okay. Emma, we had talked a little bit, previously about this, but kind of the approaches that perhaps fit for Asia in terms of how to introduce people to the sustainability topic. I mean, it's such a wide variety. There's the environmental side of things, and that may not be the best thing to approach from initially. Do you have any sort of insights or ideas about how it might be good to get people on board with sustainability topics here in Asia? Absolutely. To get the conversation going.
Sure. I think it is really important, like everyone's already been mentioning, to think, there are different interests in different regions. We did our talent mobility trend survey came out last year, and that showed interest in sort of environmental impact in direct relevance to mobility strategy was half of what it is in EMEA and the Americas. And although there's a similar sort of dip in the DEI front, there is more of an interest in APAC in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's keep in mind, of course, both with sustainability, but particularly with diversity, equity, and inclusion, that the standards apply differently in different places, even just across Asia. You know, the baseline level of what gender equality looks like, or acceptance of LGBTQ is completely different in one location versus another. So it doesn't apply across the board. But what we found is that because, to give the example that environmental sustainability is often coming as a large corporate initiative that mobility needs to get on board with. We have a carbon neutral target, and mobility needs to be a part in making that happen. And so responding to that. However, a lot of organizations also have really big diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And instead of mobility just being reactive to that, mobility has an active role to play in that space. It really ties into what our industry has always been about, which is moving and developing key talent. So, and making sure those opportunities are more diversely or equitably distributed is what a lot of people are focusing on right now. So I think starting that conversation, if people come to us interested in diversity, equity, inclusion, we are saying, as the other angle of ESG, environmental sustainability, is also vitally important and can be done at the same time. But sometimes the way into that discussion is one that is more aligned with how mobility has been, can play that active role in filling a diverse leadership pipeline. Because if you're investing in individuals, sending them on assignment, then you are thinking about their future trajectory in the organization as your future leaders.
Excellent, thank you. Benny, in terms of what you're seeing your clients do in this space in Asia, have you been seeing has there been a drastic change? Where would you describe your clients to be in this sort of journey as is commonly it's commonly framed these days?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to Sean's point earlier on as well, Europe and US, the West is actually a lot more advanced when it comes to this. And, with most of our clients in Asia being tri-regionalized, meaning that, headquarters in Europe or US, they are really literally bringing those practices, or rather requirements, flowing down, and to Emma's point, flowing downwards to the downstream, and, expecting supply chain to not necessarily as a requirement, but what are you doing, about it? So they are more concerned about, are you aware of this? Are you doing something about this? They are not expecting that big bang that, and for example, expecting RNA the next day to have a full-blown thing, but rather, starting from awareness. Are you intending to go that direction? What are you going to do about it? It could be small efforts in contributing and being a good corporate citizen, and as well as a good corporate partnership in terms of come. So I wouldn't say that it's a drastic thing, because it has always been coming down. I will probably say that pre-COVID is probably taking a lot more momentum. To Sean's point, COVID sort of slowed it down, but he has never really gone away. It's more of like, okay, we can put this aside. We're going to deal with COVID first, but this is still coming back, right? So and now that we are slowly getting out of this and getting to the new norm, if you will, there's more expectation on how the supply chain answers to it, because there are different components when it comes to their whole supply partnership. When you talk about house goods moving, they're literally heavy on carbon footprint, the trucking, the shipping, if you will. And then we talk about the DSP program, the transportation and stuff like that. So there is actually a part that everyone can do in contributing to this, and no one's part is too small. It can be going down as simple as, do you really need to print this email, to as big as, do I really need to ship this sofa? That kind of stuff. So it is now that whole awareness, and not just from a corporate perspective, but how do we flow it down to our team members, and in time to come to our clients, to our assignees? Because to Sean's point as well, the Gen Z, in fact, they're starting to get a little bit of that, whereby they are a little bit more concerned about how is this going to be affecting the environment. But of course, we talk about there are options which come with a premium that they may not be ready to pay yet. But this kind of conversation start bubbling up, right? Because we have finished that whole baby boomers, the Gen X's, the Gen Y's was a whole different story, and then now we suddenly come up with this, right? The whole Gen Z, not only in terms of recruitment, interesting that what Sean mentioned, because recently we've been out there hiring. The younger they are, the kind of questions they ask are very different. And they did talk about ESG. In fact, in the US, one of the key things that we get commonly, interviewees from the West Coast talking about is, can you tell me about your company ESG initiative? Like what? that had never gone up 10 years ago. They will be probably like, oh, what are my prospects, right? There's stuff like that. So now the world has changed a lot, not just in terms of talent, not in terms of clients, businesses, but in a whole economic climate, governments are shifting as well. So from that space, I would say that clients are actually getting, I wouldn't say harder on this, but getting more enthusiastic.
Okay,
a lot more focus.
Right.
Yeah.
Sean, so where do you think companies should be focusing their energy? Companies in Asia should be focusing their energy right now. Should everybody be rushing to create the policy? Policy or policies. What do you think is important? For sustainability in Asia right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about mobility, the biggest carbon emitter is flights. That's always the biggest one. So if there's a way within your policy to cut down flights. So for the look-see trip, for example, there's technology out there to do a virtual look-see. So you can save a significant amount of carbon just by cutting that out. The air shipment as well. Do we really need to ship an air shipment?
Right.
Can we provide an allowance for, to cover the cost of essentials? So there's some small hanging fruit, just simple tweaks to a policy. And I've even termed a green move policy, whereby, if a company wants a more carbon efficient, sustainable policy, just a few simple tweaks. So remove the look-see trip, remove the air shipment, give an allowance, reduce the sea shipment from a 40 to a 20. I did some modeling, a typical assignment for a family of 4 from London to Singapore. The carbon emission is about 40 tons, metric tons.
Right.
Whereas a few simple tweaks, like I just mentioned, you could bring that down to down to 10, just over 10 tons. So you can reduce the carbon with very little impact on the the employee experience. So some simple things like that. Companies can do that. They can take a look. They can tie it into their their carbon net neutral targets, their ESG policy, and kind of raise awareness to their employees when they're choosing their kind of assignment benefits, and just provide some awareness and education that might impact their behavior. So if they know, for example, okay, if I take this air shipment, that's going to cost, that's going to put 1,000 cubic meters of carbon in the air.
Right.
Do I really need that? Does my conscience allow me to do that?
Yeah.
So just providing the tools, the education, I think will make a big impact in just changing behaviors.
Yeah. Great ideas. So in terms of the the net zero and offsetting things, I think PGRs, you have partnered with somebody in this space, and maybe Emma, you can sort of give us an idea of what you're doing in that space and how that works.
Absolutely. I mean, I would emphasize, like everyone's saying, that the first port of call is reduction. So we're using all those types of initiatives that Sean mentioned and Benny mentioned as well. All the virtual options. We use discard and donate is a really big impactor. Being able to minimize your shipments in the first place. Digital over paper usage. And we are doing quite a lot of I suppose, green nudging is one of the, the psychological term for encouraging people through that visibility. We're working on getting more visibility per individual impact, especially, let's say, in core flex programs where there's a flex budget, and they might choose to allocate more or less of their flex budget to something, and maybe those sustainability visible sustainability impacts will change their decisions. Also, some clients are looking at gamification of that. So rewards programs. So even if it might cost you a little bit more of your flex budget to take the sustainable option, we're rewarding you for doing that in one way, shape, or form. But in any assignment, there are some essentials. If you are physically moving people, of course, there are virtual assignments, which we're also working with clients on policies about. But if you are physically moving somebody, then there are some unavoidable carbon impacts. And for those, since we're reaching for carbon net neutral, you do need to kind of be able to offset them, keeping in mind that you need, really legitimate offsetting options that are reliable. You don't want, you've heard all the stories about people planting trees in the wrong soil by the hundreds and then them all dying within the next year.
Right.
And of course, knowledge that it takes a while for trees to even become the carbon sinks they need to be. So we're trying to minimize that, but any essentials that do need to be offset, we have an exclusive partnership with a company called Ecotruck. And what happens for them is that clients pay a fixed price for a particular transport modality. So to offset their air shipment, their sea shipment, or their road shipment. And then they calculate the actual CO2 emissions and offset that with investments in accredited forestry programs. So all very above board, making sure that you're investing in the right type of offsetting. But still the intention over the long term is, of course, to lower that impact as best we can, while keeping sustaining the purpose and integrity of the value of a mobility program.
Right. Okay. And I think, Sean, you had kind of indicated that the cost of these offsetting programs is likely to rise quite a bit in the future, right? So reduction is really the thing you want to be looking at, right?
Yeah. So the cost on the market now for carbon offsets is it's probably now $4 to $5 per metric ton. When you take a flight, you can offset through the airlines. They charge around $10 per metric ton. Now, a study came out that by 2030, the cost of carbon offsets will increase tenfold, because what's happening is all these companies are making these carbon net neutral commitments by 2030, and they're going to have to find offsets, so that the demand for these carbon offsets will go up, which will drive the price up. So that's probably the one thing that will kind of move the needle on companies being more sustainable. Because if you think about that model I mentioned, the typical assignment, say from London to Singapore, family size 4, all the relocation elements, potentially 40 tons of carbon. That right now may cost around $200 US to offset that. But if that increases by 10 times, that's suddenly $2,000. So you can imagine, as a mobility manager, going to your, the business lead saying, okay, that's going to cost us $2,000 US to offset. Then, that's when it kind of raises eyebrows and gets the attention it needs. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So obviously, reduction is the priority, and to use these offsets. And overusing these offsets, there's a term for it, right? Emma, what was the term?
Well, we were using the term greenwashing, but I think that applies more broadly as well. Just anyone, companies who have a big public goal and are just doing it to check boxes, making it look like they're doing the right things where they don't necessarily have the right motivations. The same thing happens with diversity and inclusion, and I think there's a diversity washing term that is occasionally being used for that as well. And that can feel really disingenuous. It doesn't help with the talent acquisition if it feels like it's hypocritical. We've seen some terrible examples of companies who have a great public commitment, and then internally we've heard people say that's not what it's like to work here. That's we're not walking the talk. And so it was really important these things are genuine. And a lot of the chats we had earlier, even Benny's discussions about awareness, exposure, just helping people get on board, that it can't all be coming from one region, that even if, it's not as hot a topic or not as high up the agenda in Asia Pacific, I think it is vital that everyone gets on board, because it's our planet, whoever's fault it was since the Industrial Revolution, that we're where we're at. And so, I think that is a key part of some of those global initiatives, is making sure that people feel environmentally and diversity-wise that they are a part of this journey, and that it's visible to them. And the greenwashing or diversity washing is, something you want to avoid, because it is disingenuous, and you can see through that quite quickly when you look at a company's culture.
Right.
And it's interesting in that, most companies are focusing on their scope 1 emissions, which is, the direct emissions that come out of the business. But a lot of companies are making these carbon net neutral targets across the whole business, which is scope 1, 2, and 3. Now, relocation sits in scope 3. That includes business travel, relocation. So that's why right now it's not really a big focus for HR, because that scope 3 isn't kind of really on the agenda right now. But as we get closer to 2030, and all these companies have to report out on how close they are to their net neutral targets across the board, then they're going to have to start tracking and offsetting this. And you've got Apple came out recently and said they're going to go carbon net neutral across all the business, including supply chain. And there's an organization called Transform to Net Zero. Founding members are like Microsoft, Nike, Maersk, Starbucks, and a few others, again, across the full business. So, and I've spoken to many of these companies, they're not currently focusing on it within their mobility programs, but they know that it will come. So it's, it's only a year or two away probably until, the chief sustainability officer starts pushing HR and throughout the whole supply chain of the business to start addressing it.
Yeah, so that's an important topic as well. And Benny, I don't know if you have any other sort of insights on how what it will take for to move the dial on sustainability within global mobility. Have you been seeing other things with your clients?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that, because I think the last time we talked about it, we're starting to see clients talk about a RFD Responses, which is good to have ESG turning into a requirement, into a barrier, which means that you don't have a solid ESG, and to Emma's point, no wet paint, right? And if you don't really have that, you don't get a foot in the door to even try the game. So this is getting more prevalent, and slowly to Sean's case, to Sean's point, over time, this will flow over to, okay, then great, AllTech, you have this. What about your supply partners? So it will come, and to your point earlier on, how are companies are expected to react to that? As a supplier, like a DSP or house of goods, where should they start and things like that? Starting from awareness, how do they build to that momentum? And then talking about a little bit that you mentioned about how do you really get that whole engagement, is really how you can intervene into a company culture. Because to Emma's point, if it's not in your company culture, it is what is displayed on the wall, right? We have so many times seen that company vision, mission statement are just as good as on the wall, right? Only when it is truly in the culture of the leadership of the team members that you can know that they eat, live, breathe that, and that is then what it really is. It will be the case. So it's really how can we integrate that whole ESG and including the environmental factors into the whole a culture of how am I going to be a good corporate citizen as a whole, and individually how am I contributing to the company as an individual team member, as an individual employee, that kind of stuff. So a lot got to do with top down. While a lot of companies are extremely bottom line driven, and let's be blunt, no one's running a charity program here. So while bottom line is still the key, but many times that we are looking at, to Sean's point, is that if you are not placing enough emphasis on ESG, you may see the bottom line today, but you may not be able to see that in the next 5 to 10 years, especially if you're not getting the right people, because they are not coming on. Let's face it. As years come by, it will be one day it will be the day of the Gen Z, right? If it is all about that, you're not able to attract the right talent, you're not able to retain the right talent and the right investments and stuff like that. So, all this start to play the game. If there's anything that Asia has an advantage, is that we get to see what works and what doesn't work at the other side of the world, and we get to learn from their mistakes. But the gist of it is we still got to start moving. If we are not moving, you might be way behind the game.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And Benny was jokingly saying to me the other day that at Relay Network Asia we need to start using Teslas to take our clients around. When we start doing that sort of thing, the price of the fees that we charge for a package using a Tesla, for example, is that definitely has to go up. So now one question to perhaps Emma, and then perhaps back to Benny, is are your clients willing to pay more for environmentally friendly or programs that are more sustainable, or is that something we're yet to see? Perhaps Emma, we start with you on that one.
So, unfortunately, I don't think yet they're necessarily willing to put that much money where their mouth is in this regard. The promises are massive, but a lot of the demands are being pushed down the supply chain. Who's going to take the cost? Because it right now doesn't necessarily look like the client is. But even then, I think it comes down to even an individual basis. If you're looking at, let's say, once again, a Core Flex program, people can preach about how green they are and bring their own bags to the supermarket. But when they're asked, okay, well, you'll have to spend more of your budget on green, well-insulated accommodation, or maybe you should cut your home visits down from the duration, the amount you get, or not, or have them every 1.5 years or something else like that. And people aren't necessarily willing to make those sacrifices. Some people are, but not necessarily where it cuts into their own budget. And similarly, I think clients are feeling the same. So with EcoLegit, when we first launched it, we launched it as a voluntary option to offset your household goods. And all of our clients had been clamoring at it. We'd heard it in all our RFPs. That's what people wanted. But for the small flat fee that it was per person, we didn't get a lot of uptake on companies willing to pay for it. So we've sort of wrapped that into helping our suppliers to become more sustainable, because in order for, as you said, if you're going down that pipeline, all the suppliers will need to be sustainable as well in the future. And so that's sort of helping them along their path, saying, okay, here's how we can envelop the cost of offsetting your services so that you don't have to do it. But it is an additional cost to them right now. So I think there will have to, it'll be a point where something will have to give. And I think people will realize that they do need to spend in order to make some of these changes, that it isn't going to be free, especially not with the current status of supply chain and otherwise scarcity of resources as they currently are.
Yeah. Benny, similar on your side of things?
Yeah, pretty similar. In fact, I will take the chance to connect what Emma and Sean said, right? I mean, nearing to 2030, they will all have to pay someone, if not the employee, the company, because they are going for the net zero. But right now, that is probably not it's probably more widely spoken and mentioned rather than putting where the money, where the mouth is for now. However, there are still low-lying fruits. Like, for example, there can be green initiatives that can be win-win for the business as well. For example, Steve, you mentioned about, perhaps going out on an electric car can increase costs. And that is probably something that you want to look at it nearer down the road, but not now. But for example, initially when you start moving from that big giant welcome package, I remember 10 years ago, it came in a nice box with all the materials in there. Transferring that into a soft copy, into an application itself, it's not just only sustainable, not only just green, but it also saves business costs and more scalable. So we could start looking at those kind of options for a start, to gain a little bit of traction, because it is a win-win for the business. You save certain level of business cost, efficiency, and to Sean's point, what COVID has taught us is that when push to shove, people can work from home, people can do virtual viewing, right? I mean, I think we have all seen people securing properties just by looking it through a virtual tour without having to see the property because the market was so hot, things like that. Yes. So and I love what Sean mentioned about changing behavior. Well, it is tough changing human behavior. We know that COVID is painful enough that behavior change. We are seeing assignees behaving a lot differently right now, because right now, if you put a house good shipment from, say, London to Singapore, you're not going to see it for the next 60 to 90 days easily. So what's going to happen right now? Are you going to really bring that thing with you? Things I think people start to think a lot more than the past, whereby it is more of a use it or lose it. So since the company is giving me a 40-foot, I'll just put everything, and when I reach the host, I'll see what I want to dump. You see that? So the whole mindset has changed because of this whole pandemic. And of course, as we go nearer to to Sean's point, that a lot of companies in 2030 net zero, how they're going to do it, they have to make things happen. So when it comes to a point whereby it has to cost them X dollars, and to Sean's point, 10 times X by then someone has to pay for it. If not, they assign it the company, or if not, it will be integrated somewhere along the package. So what I would say that right now it is very premature. It is more of awareness stage right now. There are low-lying fruits that we can still achieve, not just by discard and donate. That was a good one. You talk about really rethinking about your house goods shipment. Do you really need to do that? Thinking about pre-assignment trip, home leave trip, for example, that how much you really need that. And of course, the welcome, I know the welcome package is way over, but I thought that was a really good example where we did that without realizing is actually we did that for sustainability. We did that more for bottom line, but it works in both ways. So there are a lot more ways, I believe, that can achieve a win-win that encourage companies and businesses to evolve towards the direction.
Yeah, I think so. Just looking at my own organization, I mean, a lot of this is just about documenting the things that you're already doing and making sure that people are aware that you're doing that virtual program, or doing that online welcome package or whatever. Sorry, Sean,
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the relocation companies, the DSPs, can actually play a real active part in this, because if they can adapt their kind of orientation services to, really educate the new arrival on, recycling, public transport, what are the secondhand marketplaces they can use? What are some local kind of, how can they purchase locally, for example? What kind of the wet markets in Singapore as an example? So yeah, just adapting, the service a little bit to make it more environmentally friendly and aware.
Right.
Can then change assignees or new transferees' behaviors. So I think there's some small tweaks you can do that can make an impact as well.
Yes, yeah, and and as people are kind of transitioning into a different sort of lifestyle, it's quite often a good time for them to be changing the way they do things, right? So yeah. I do agree that we do have we have a role to play in that. I'm going to end the questioning very soon. We've got at least one question that I'll come to in a second. So if anybody else out there would like to ask any questions, please do so now by putting things in the chat there, and we'll try to get to those. I just wanted to close around measurement and the topic of how you can measure and record how you're doing and that sort of thing. Sean, do you perhaps have any sort of tips of simple things that we can start measuring to kind of see how we're progressing? I think for a lot of us the measurement thing is something that we've not really thought about before, or not quite sure how to go about. Any tips for that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, there are some resources out there you can go to. There's carbonfootprint.com, which is you can put in a lot of different parameters there, and it'll spit out what your carbon footprint is of that particular activity. Another one is Time for Change, which calculates carbon emissions on the shipping of goods. So that's the tool I used when I did a bit of modeling. There's one called hotelfootprints.org. So that will give you the hotel, the carbon footprint of different types of hotels. So there's resources out there. The only problem is for our industry, there's no one cohesive tool that calculates all the elements of a relocation. Ecologit, as Emma mentioned, is a great starting point, and they're tracking the carbon emissions for shipments, which is along with flights, the biggest contributor to carbon. So I mean, as a starting point, I would, look for a mobility manager or even for, an account manager serving a client, take a look at the relocation allowance elements and use some of these tools to calculate the carbon, and just use that to raise awareness, because like I mentioned, you could reduce your carbon footprint by 50-75% just by making a few simple tweaks, and that could really have a significant impact to your clients carbon net neutrality goals.
Right. Emma, did you have anything else to add? Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I would say, I think if anyone's well, first of all, we're working with a client and their tax provider to actually maybe ideally come up with a mobility specific calculator that does look specifically at our industry and the types of impacts. And they're talking about getting details out per assignment type, per category, based on reduction opportunities and scenarios, and sourcing data from a range of different places, so that it really does represent things. But that's still in progress. We don't have that yet. I would just say, if anyone's interested in getting one of the official accreditations, we're working on our ISO and also our EcoVadis upgrades, hopefully this year. And we've been working hard at it. And with that, they have incredible guidance as well. They have, if you want to try and get your EcoVadis qualifications, they give you really solid step-by-step. Here are the things you need to think about. They have online videos to support you. They have really great articles coming out. So just by sort of even probing in that area, even before you get your qualifications, there's some great ideas going around there and some excellent inspiration. And they're happy to sort of hold your hand and walk you step by step in how to become more sustainably accredited.
Right. Okay. I have one question here. I'll just read it out, actually. I think, has anybody thought of some kind of marketing tie-up with Teslas and the Toyotas of the world to have them temporarily lend out vehicles for VIP moves? I'd be happy to wear an I Heart Elon cap to the office if it could get one of our consultants behind the wheel of an Ecotruck. So would somebody like to take this this question on marketing tie-ups with some of the the car companies around the world?
I'll probably take a dip at that. They're probably more interested in leasing you a car if you want to, more than lending you a car, because they themselves has been marketing effectively from that perspective. But one of the key things that I think, William, interesting question, is really about that whole Ecotruck as well. Could potentially in the US that whole Ecotruck be a potential, a replacement for the trucking, because we know one of the big carbon footprint besides airplanes is actually all those trucking that's happening across states in the US for domestic move, for example. So that might be interesting, especially I think all of you saw that whole Ecotruck demo. That top power seems really good, really cool.
Right. Yes.
I would also add in, I think the idea of marketing and cross-collaborating is the key, right? And we all care about this. We all want to make a difference. And if it could mutually benefit us, through relationships with other organizations, then absolutely. I think we were talking about things like much less glamorous than getting to drive a Tesla truck. But we were talking about, if your carbon footprint is now people working from home, do you have responsibility for their home bills? And also, of course, our large mobile populations that we're helping to relocate places, do we need relationships with energy providers to say, you make sure you're a more green energy provider, and we'll recommend that assignees or employees of PGRs use these energy providers. We'll get a good group deal at a time where energy suppliers are increasingly expensive. Is that something that we could do that would be mutually beneficial for everybody and sort of give people what they need, as well as a nice little cross-marketing opportunity, but not quite as glamorous. I don't have a Tesla cap, unfortunately.
Yes, well, a lot of this does sort of filter down to our own sort of consumption patterns, right? How do you consume things at home, and what are you doing with your plastics and things like that? So it really starts to make everybody think about that. So I think that's great. Well, I don't have any other questions to go on. So I do have one last question. With everything going on in Ukraine, this is perhaps not so related to the sustainability topic, but I'd like to ask the three of you anyway. But with the horrible things that are going on in Ukraine with the Russia invasion and a completely unnecessary war, obviously there's going to be some economic fallout from this for everybody. Obviously, more for Europe than other parts of the world. But that will filter through eventually to Asia in some way and form. How do you think this could affect sort of the global mobility industry that we're in here in Asia? Just how does everybody see that sort of impacting things over the next 6, 12, 18 months? Because there's some obviously inflation is an obvious one, but perhaps. Starting with Sean, perhaps, do you have any sort of views on how this might affect us in the industry that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is the rising oil price. So, the cost of freight and flights will eventually go up. But the biggest impact I've seen is clients coming to us saying they need to move employees out of Ukraine and Russia and find alternative places to employ them. And this is also Russian employees, because remember, there's a lot of Russians that just don't agree with what's going on with their country and they want to get out. We were talking to a client, a Russian tech firm that the founders live in the UK, but they've got a big tech team in Russia, and all of those want to get out. So they're looking for a place to relocate them to and kind of employ them remotely. So that's why these employer of record companies are very popular right now, and we've struck an alliance with Deal, and that's what they do. They help employ and payroll people in locations where a company doesn't have an entity. So that's providing real solutions for people right now. So we're seeing a lot of that. And we also do a lot of work with Talent Beyond Boundaries, which helps to find visa pathways and jobs for displaced talent and refugees. So of course, that's always been focused on the Middle East, with Lebanon and refugees from Syria and so on. Right. But now, of course, that same problem is happening across Europe. So again, organizations like this are stepping up to really make a difference and help with people's lives.
Thank you. Okay. Benny, from your perspective, how do you see this affecting us out here?
I'll probably, this is what I've observed. One of the biggest thing I think we've learned from COVID 2 years ago is that no one thought that it would last 2 years, right? I mean, a lot of HR or mobility was like, okay, this is a 2 month thing. Let's just wave it over, right? A lot of time we go like, okay, let's just delay that move for 2 months. And then month after month, and then the most latest one, I have an assignee who thanked me after relocating over 3 years. So things like that happens that actually got the HR to rethink and mobility to rethink, like, should we be a little bit more proactive in this? And then while we are still trying to get out of this whole pandemic, and then there came the crisis, if there's anything that we all see that crisis building up, but no one really thought that it would happen, but it did anyway. So one of the key things that I see the global mobility taking away from this is really, it's no longer just being proactive, but it's a lot more predictive. To Sean's point, at this point, if any company goes to Sean and say, I need to get people out of Russia, I mean, there's very limited options right now. And we actually had someone that we got out, and what happened is that he couldn't have access to his bank, because it's all sanctions, stuff like that. So even you can get the guy out, what will be the support going to be, and stuff like that. So, I guess this made mobility a little bit more predictive, if you will. And this is actually a great opportunity, because I think we have heard about this over many years, whereby they may not necessarily have a seat at the table. But guess what? When a crisis happened, they turn to them and go, hey guys, sort it out. Your mobility, right? You're supposed to move them. And then this is actually an opportunity that for the global mobility folks to really gain a seat at the table and go, hey guys, we not just have to be proactive, we get to be a little bit more predictive, especially key assets. If you are not just, to Sean's point, not necessarily just during the crisis, but in the Middle East, or where are the other locations and stuff like that, where are our potential backup evacuation plans and stuff like that, which in the past all fall back under governance and under their BCP, right, business continuity plan. But now we're talking about people. When it's not just talking about data or processes or decision makers and stuff like that. So I see that evolving rather quickly than ever. We start to see, the mobility in our clients having a much larger say than the past. So yeah, this is what I have observed.
And finally, Emma, over to you.
Yeah.
Last comments.
I would very much jump on the bandwagon with Benny there. I think there's this threefold sort of impact that we're seeing. One, I think Sean really covered, a lot of the impact to business as usual. I think we're seeing that a lot with visas, and there are plenty of countries in Europe, of course, in particular, where they've stopped processing normal visas, the Netherlands being a good example, because they just have such a large backlog of refugee visas to handle. So that affects wider mobility. If anyone else was moving to the Netherlands, then that's going to be delayed right now. Similarly, temporary accommodation, not just in the affected countries, but the sort of expanding surrounded area or anywhere that's accepting refugees sort of globally. There's price hikes on that and availability issues. But really, along the lines with what Benny was saying, and we're also releasing some thought leadership on this next week, is the evolving role of mobility leaders as crisis managers. Providing duty of care from things from the pandemic through to any form of political unrest. And that is needing to be prepared, preparedness, and how ready is your program to deal with live and constantly changing information and the emotional fallout of that. Like Benny said, this is people this time. And I think a lot of mobility leaders are really feeling absolutely burnt out, raw, and emotional from dealing with a lot of this. And they're being pulled into that space. But the upsides being, like Benny mentioned, it is a seat at the table like the pandemic gave us, and the ability to pivot to alternative types of mobility and to keep that globalized talent and development pipeline on the right path in spite of crises is, I think, more the role that mobility is going to grow and take as these things evolve.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your views and things today. I think this has really helped a lot of the audience and helped myself sort of better have a better idea of what we can do in our role in our roles, in our different roles within mobility, to really push this forward and to it's obvious that we need to do this together, and if we don't, if all of us don't get together and do this, it's it's not going to have an effect, because there's not one person doing something is not going to have a great effect. But well, thank you very much, everybody. I do hope that we can do this again at some point in the future. Thank you very much for all of your insight, and yes, wishing everybody that in the audience today a good day or a good evening or a good morning, depending on where you are. And I hope you can join our Reload Network Asia / Reload Japan webinars in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.